Hi everyone. I'm sorry for a little delay. And anyway, thanks for sticking around, especially before the lunchtime. I'll try to keep it short and sharp for you and hopefully useful, especially for fintech companies, because they are kind of under some pressure these days. They have to meet the strict compliance requirements like PCI DSS, SOC 2, GDPR, and at the same time expected to move fast and scale quickly and also keep their cloud costs under control. So that's what I want to talk about today. Is it actually possible? Can you actually have both? Can fintech companies stay compliant within the cloud? It's going to be like a disco today. And keep the costs under control. It looks like it works now. The question stayed the same. Cloud compliance versus cost efficiency. And to do a quick intro, I want to do an intro. Oh, now I can't switch the slides. Oh, okay. So my name is Obiidykhata, and I'm a senior solutions manager for cloud native products. And I spent last 8 years in open source technologies, open source world, working on projects like Alma Linux, if you heard, Cloud Linux, and currently at Percona. And I truly believe that the open source software should be a fundamental for tech stack for growing companies. Not even, but especially for such heavily regulated field as a fintech. And let's start by looking into what the challenge is actually with the compliance these days. And the spoiler, that's pricing. So storing 1 terabyte of audit logs for 1 year in services like AWS CloudTrail or S3 Glacier, just to meet a basic compliance requirements can cost a fintech startup upwards about $25,000 annually just for this amount of data. And now and that's even before the query cost, replication, any disaster recovery setup. And now if to imagine that the fintech company expanded to Europe and they are now a subject of the GDPR compliance, and those residency rules, meaning that all customer data should stay within EU borders, let's imagine that the cheapest AWS region suddenly off limits, and they're now locked into, let's say, Frankfurt or Ireland, which is more expensive, less flexible, and every architecture choice from this point just starts compounding their bills. And if to take a look on PCI DSS or 4.0, for example, it requires encryption of cardholder data, meaning that detailed audit log, real-time monitoring, backup and recovery plans. That's not just a checklist, that's a very expensive cloud stack blueprint. Or if you need, for example, data to reside in a specific country, and you may not have the cloud of choice in this country, and you have to obtain another hyperscaler there, or, for example, find another cloud provider, which is like expensive in multiple ways. So here's the core tension. The fintechs are required to comply with no room for shortcuts, but the cloud services that enable those compliance are priced at premium. And you can't really skip the audit logs, backup, and encryption, but each one of these just chips off the cost efficiency that was promised at the first place in the cloud. If to take a look on the actual compliance price tag, what comes with doing the right things in the cloud? It's now kind of baked into how the cloud infrastructure works. So take the data residency we mentioned before, GDPR or UK DPA. You can't just spin up the cheapest region and call it a day. You are stuck into pricier zone and maybe even with the limited capabilities, services, or fear redundancy options. And encryption, if you want to do it in the proper way, with the customer managed keys, you're looking into ongoing charges for key management system and hardware security model services. And thousands of those key operations well, that's real money. And if to take a look on the audit login, for example, it's another compliance pillar, especially under PSD2 and SOX, because if you're feeding those logs into, let's say, CloudTrail and retaining them there for years and piping them into a CEM system, it gets very expensive very fast. And yet you can't just stop doing that. And then, last but not least, there is the disaster recovery strategy. If it's a multi-regional backups, versioning, immutable snapshots, that multiple layer of storage. And I'm not even talking about the cloud licensing for the software that you use on-prem and want to use the same stack in the cloud. You would have to pay for those licenses separately in the cloud. So yes, compliance is kind of non-negotiable, but when we talk about this, I think we don't talk enough about the way we do compliance in the cloud. And the way we do it, it's kind of locks you into the more premium features in inflexible architecture and as a result in hidden costs at scale. Let's take some example. Let's take some compliance-ready web application with some, obviously, Fintech, with some, let's say you're running a payment processing app on AWS, and with PCI DSS requirements and SOC 2 compliance needs, let's take 3 availability zones, customer data and encrypted storage. Let's take about 200 gigabyte database with 1 log retention and redundant disaster recovery. And let's pick a moderate traffic volume, something about 30 million monthly encrypted operations. It's basically pretty standard architecture. You're doing everything right. You got strong encryption, you've implemented audit logging, immutable backups, and failover across multiple zones, like nothing excessive. And if you take a look on the compliance overhead pricing just for this small amount of data, that can go crazy. So if to go through each specifically, let's say the audit logs, it's alone can cost you nearly 900. It's between ingestion and storing in years worth of logs in S3. Then encryption with, let's say, AWS key management system, that's another 200, because just from the millions of those read-writes hitting your keys, that's where the money comes from. And the backups, daily snapshots of those 200 gigabytes with 30-day retention, that's another 400. And if you replicate those to another regions, that bumps it into another 1,000. And finally, high availability across 3 regions, that doubles it to the 1,000 more per month. So none of those features are actually extra, and they're basic compliance requirement, but each one has this price tag that's hidden under infrastructure. And when they stack up, they quite quickly turn into thousands of overhead, on a monthly basis. And when to take a look on the share where the money goes most, usually people pay more attention and love to focus on infrastructure like secure networks, hardened images, and IAM policies. But when to peel it back, the real pain point, both in terms like risks and cost, almost always come from storage. So you're required to keep those logs for years, and you pile them up in the CloudTrail. You do backup snapshots, maybe across, as I mentioned, multiple regions, and it grows in the background until your S3 bills just, makes you blink. And, database is quite a killer in this way. And let's take a look why. It's pretty easy. That's where all your sensitive data lies, and they must always be on, and they must be secure, and they're very expensive to scale in a safe way. And the question here is, can open source help with any of that? Well, it should. If we will use a Postgres, MySQL, open source database technologies anyway. But it's not enough. The key trick here is to run them on your own terms, meaning either in the private cloud, either in the cloud that's managed by you with your own keys. And for example, in the private Kubernetes cluster with the custom login and monitoring, and use the open source stack to manage, where you still, to manage those databases, where you still retain the control, even with the same level of automation that hyperscalers can offer to you. So it's not enough. The open source databases, as I mentioned, is not enough really. The difference makes is, the real difference lays is where you store it. And if take a look on the few options, the real advantage lies in having control over both your infrastructure and your data. And if your business is data sensitive, I assume fintechs are kind of sensitive, and compliance heavy, and running open source databases your way can be really different between owning architecture and just paying for someone else's version of it. So if to go through each component, on the first two columns here, you will see options that enable you with full stack ownership, meaning that you making all the decision and your infrastructure became like customizable for you, gives you more opportunity, versus the public DBaaS option gives you the convenience. It's quite quick, but the tricky thing is that those convenience is tied to your data, not to your revenue, unfortunately. And as your data grows, those convenience fee keeps growing with it. So in terms of compliance, with either on-prem, either in the cloud, but like in the version that would be managed by you, you are having a full ownership of your key management system. You can choose location and policy. You can bring your own tools. There is no hidden charges. And obviously, last but not least, is the no vendor lock-in, meaning that your architecture is portable, your backups are open format, and your automation can move across the clouds and even come back on-prem if needed. If to take a look on the same data, but with some assumptions, let's say for 1 terabyte, 1 year, that doesn't look like a huge difference. But if to apply to a real growing architecture and like multiply it for 5 years, that's where the difference comes from. So you are not just running databases. You are basically building the setup that's secure and compliant and cost-effective by design. That's the ultimate goal. And let's take a look on how the, let's say, healthy, compliant, cost-efficient, cloud-native architecture could look like. The database is obviously open source, for example, Postgres, Mongo, MySQL, and they deployed on either VMs or Kubernetes with operators. Backups should be stored in your own cloud, object storage with the policy-driven retention and encryption. End-to-end encryption at app level, at rest, and managed through your own external key management system. Networking is zero trust architecture with the private access only. Monitoring and logging, obviously, through the open source stack like Percona, monitoring and management, Prometheus, OpenTelemetry. It should be integrated with your existing CM system or observability tools. And the multi-region compliance. It should be flexible and set up with scripted or GitOps-driven replication and control across environments. And if to take a look on some example of successful cases when fintech moved from proprietary-driven architecture, I can highlight BBVA. That's our recent use case, recent client who we helped. For those who don't know, BBVA is a major fintech in Spain with operations in Mexico, Turkey, and they needed cost-efficient, compliant, and vendor-fair database strategy after their frustration with the MongoDB enterprise licenses and contract practices. So while their MongoDB databases were running on around 8 applications across bank infrastructure, they didn't want to carry on and being a subject of those expensive licenses and loss of their deployment strategy for the future. So they decided to move to the Percona open source stack, which is drop-in replacement for MongoDB with enterprise-level features, but still absolutely free and open source. So it includes Percona, a server for MongoDB, monitoring and management for observability, and Percona backup for MongoDB. All of those feature enterprise level, not the community version, meaning that all the compliance features already included into that. And the key thing here is that they didn't just swap one software to another. They didn't just swap MongoDB to the Percona server. They initiated the build of support-driven architecture with open source tool that I just mentioned, meaning that gives them the full transparency across backup, monitoring, and encryption. And the best part, they didn't have to change anything in their application because that's the drop-in replacement. So if to sum it all up, yes, you can stay audit ready in the cloud without being logged into these overpriced managed services. And for the things like encryption, audit logging, and data locality, your DB choice will make or break the strategy here. It's not just about cost. It's about building your infrastructure around your risks and government's needs. And the ultimate principles for that should be self-healing, portable, and policy-driven architecture. This is what the compliance automation should look like. And the idea here and the ultimate goal is to build infrastructure for predictability and for transparency, and just leave all those vendor negotiation battles behind. If to talk quickly about where to get started, I would say that the first thing is obviously to audit your current database compliance overhead, with what software it runs, what exactly the processes for backups, logging, and encryption, and evaluate the open source options that wouldn't sacrifice the automation or performance. And another important thing is to move forward is consider the gradual rollout, how it may look like, to what platforms, and the key idea here is to balance the flexibility and the regulatory control. And last but not least, I would say that would be probably the most important, is to work with vendors that partner and not push you over upsell. The idea here is to have a partner that will benefit not based on the data that grows and will not depend on the convenience fee that's tied to this data, but will depend on the level, basically, of your happiness and your cost efficiency. And that's kind of it. If you're interested in specific details about BBVA case, you're welcome to scan a QR code. There's going to be a case study available with that. And thank you. That's basically it. I think we might run out of time considering the previous session. No? Cool. Then if any questions, then we still have time. Thank you.